released in 2011. It soon became a gay anthem, and it's not hard to imagine why. There we can hear, I'm beautiful in my way, because God makes no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. Don't hide yourself in regret. Just love yourself and you're set. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. The lyrics certainly resonate with what has been a leitmotif since the beginning of the gay liberation. That is, to be proud of who you are. Sorry, short break because I'm allowing people to enter. Okay.
Maybe you can open the waiting room so anybody can enter. So you don't have to admit.
How do I do that?
In the
Carlos, go to security settings.
Security. Thank you,
And
Maria.
disable the waiting room.
Thanks.
I think you stop sharing, maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Okay, security.
I don't know why my option doesn't have allow co-host.
Okay. The third is the one.
Yeah.
The lyrics resonate with what has been a leitmotif since the beginning of the gay liberation. That is, to be proud of who you are. But it also brings something new, more characteristic of our current times. It closes into the possibility of thinking who you are. I am what I am, what I am seems to be the answer provided by the song, the right answer for a more permissive culture where you do you. I still remember when homosexuality was controversial, when coming out was the process of unpacking a lot of questions about one's identity, including a misleading one. Was I born this way? Facing the false dichotomy between nature and nurture, a gay man is born or made. Psychoanalysis offers a different way to formulate and answer the question. It is about this topic, the question of identity in gay men, that I would like to talk today. I have been working on this project for a while, and it is now that I realize that I'm answering a question posed by Miller in his 1996-1997 seminar. And I quote, "What remains invariable in homosexuality and what makes in the social order when received from a completely different way, when a new norm gives an unprecedented and massive legitimacy to the homosexual bond." So this is a question that it was in amidst the legalization of same-sex marriage and legal unions for gay men. So I hope that this gives some answers to, or part of the answer for this question. Identity in psychoanalysis. First, let's start by reminding the audience that identity is not a core concept in psychoanalysis. The invention of psychoanalysis comes, at least logically, after the discovery of the unconscious. Freud identified a conscious-unconscious split in his patients, and from there, following the path of symptoms, dreams, jokes, sleeps, and other disruption of the conscious flow, verified the reality of the unconscious. What emerged from it is a challenging proposition, a third slap to humanity's ego, always relevant, as the tendency is keeping insisting on the belief according to which one can choose and fully determine who one is. Freud's topologies, the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious first, and the id, ego, and superego later, have to be taken as two different attempts to produce an answer to the problem of that inner division, its intricacies, and mental functioning. Here, it is interesting to notice that Freud implicitly assumed from the very beginning that there is no such a thing as a priori identity. The ego is not present at birth. It emerges through an interactive process with caregivers and the environment. The development of the ego is, ultimately, a theory describing how we come to believe who we think we are amidst the primacy of the unconscious. In short, the ego is a mental object which provides a false sense of unity about oneself. Lacan started following Freud's path, but approached the question of identity from a logical point of view. Along Lacan's teaching, we can identify three logics that allow us to conceptualize identities in general and the gay identity in particular. In the first years of his teaching, Lacan departs from ethological findings to produce the logic of identity in the imaginary. Given the biological prematurity of humans at birth, the lack of sensory and motor coordination, the infant has a fragmented experience of the body. It is through mirroring, seeing one's image in the mirror or taking others as mirror images, among other possibilities, that the subject organizes the perceptive field, distinguishing the body as a unit differentiated from the rest of the environment. Thou art that is the first answer the subject receives to the question, who am I? Encountering that image is a jubilant experience with three key implications. The first one, alienation. The infant recognizes themselves in something they're not. This introduces the function of misrecognition that characterizes the ego. Secondly, specularity. If I am that image, I am here and I'm there. And from this emerges the problematic aspect inherent in interpersonal relationships. Any other may support an image of oneself, but if the identification fails, the result will be aggressivity. We could verbalize this through the following statement. You're not the image I want to see of myself, therefore you must be destroyed. Speaking beings take their image from the other, but don't deal well with alterity, with otherness. The third consequence or implication is the emergence of the ideal ego. There's always a gap between one's body and the image. The image is always going to seem ahead in terms of unity and mastery, introducing an unattainable goal, that is, the aspiration to be like the one behind the mirror. Now, starting in Seminar 5, Lacan begins to pull out another logic to articulate identity, one based on the signifier and its effect, a symbolic logic. The shift is rather challenging and it involves refining his ideas on the signifier and the signifier chain. It is not until Seminar 9 that he can formalize how symbolic identification is an operation where the subject is determined by a signifier, where the ego gets modified by symbolic identification. If in the first logic, the key element is an image, in the second one is a signifier. Not any signifier, but a particular one, a unary trait, a discrete and discontinuous mark containing an inherent serial property, as it is linked with an idealized trace from the other. This piece will constitute the core of the ego ideal. Identity, according to a symbolic logic, then, consists of the identification with a unary trait, which supports the formation of the ego ideal and thus normalizes desire. This will be the second component in this logic, one related to how the subject deals with the object produced by the cut introduced by this signifier. Let's remember here that language introduces the dimension of desire. As Lacan says, is a characteristic of an animal at the mercy of language. Man's desire is the other's desire. This desire is enigmatic, and it is never clear what the other wants, but the symbolic logic allows us to normalize it, opening the possibility of articulating an answer. In Seminar 10, Lacan continues elaborating on that cut and the object produced by it, formalizing his object A. Object A is what remains irreducible in the advent of the subject at the locus of the other, and it is from this that it is going to take on its function. Some of the drive is never going to be tamed, not by the image nor by the signifier, and returns in the real as something intimately exterior. Object A is the key concept in a third logic of identity, but in this case, not consolidating one, but disrupting any image or any sense of identity. It introduces the dimension of the body and how this one becomes an other, challenging subject's intentions. This object A points toward that doesn't work and always returns to the same place. In Seminar 20, Lacan subverts many of his previous concepts and theories, introducing what Miller defines as a new paradigm of jouissance. Object A has now the status of a semblant. The real, the symbolic, and the imaginary are now disjoint. From now on, it would be about the primacy of the real. It is from this later Lacan approach that I propose to think the articulation of identity in gay men by noting the three logics just described. The decline of the father / the rise of a sexual brotherhood. If you attended my previous presentation, you may remember that central to it was the distinction between the ahistorical and the historical / contingent dimension of sexuality, the drive and a semblant, respectively. Male homosexuality has been constructed in several ways at various times, resulting in different types of subjective experiences. There, I established a series moving from the figure of the sodomite to the homosexual and later to the gay man. Gay was a new signifier, which drastically reorganized the field in the last quarter of the 20th century. But before jumping into that transformation, I want to answer the question, why this happened? Why suddenly gays came out of the closet? Notice that here, I'm not pointed out to a cause. Oh, well, short answer is, it happened due to the decline of the father. Notice that here, I'm not pointed out to a cause, to a social process, as a sociologist would do. The decline of the father did not precede the emergence of the gay identity. The emergence of the gay identity is one of the many facets of the decline of the father. In other words, the decline of the father is the name of a shift in the structure, one where the father as an organizer got displaced, producing the fall of the other. This is the beginning of our time, the Lacanian moment of psychoanalysis, as opposed to the Freudian moment, which revolved around the figure of the father. Now, in his seminar of 1996-1997, The Other That Doesn't Exist and its Committees of Ethics, Miller states that civilization symptoms have to be deciphered first in the United States of America. This is precisely the case when talking about the decline of the father. I strongly recommend you to read chapter 5 and 6 of Harris' Why Nothing Works. It's a study of American anthropology, to have a detailed description of how the shift occurred. It's very interesting, all the data and indicators that he uses to sustain what I'm going to summarize here. So as the summary, United States of America emerged from World War II as the #1 global superpower. This brought an immediate expansion of the economy, and with it, an anomaly in terms of natality, the baby boom. An antinatalist tendency was already in place, consequence of society moving from a rural organization to an urban one. This tendency then took a strange shape. More young people after the war got married, and although had less children than their predecessors, multiplied the American population. Eventually, the economic expansion resulted in the great inflation, and women who were already working part-time felt the pressure to complement their husbands' salaries to keep up with the recently adopted consumerist lifestyle. According to the myth, the emancipated woman was the one leading the way to the worker woman. But Harris shows how the opposite was the case. With all these socioeconomic changes, women suddenly faced an unprecedented situation. They found themselves, on one hand, having an income and the freedom that comes with it. And on the other hand, They found themselves dealing with a husband unable to make ends meet, but demanding admiration and submission. The worker woman was the one leading to the emancipated woman. The commercialization of contraceptive pills in the 60s just came up as a handy technology to reinforce a change that had already happened. In just a matter of few years, a new cultural force leaping from antinatalism to sexual freedom took major cities in the United States by storm, and the world would never be the same again. Another key factor: World War II was the first time that the American government tried to systematically identify and exclude homosexuals from the army. Those identified in the South Pacific Theater were dishonorably discharged and processed out in San Francisco. This is the main reason why San Francisco was once considered the gay capital of the world, because it was there where the emergence of a gay ghetto was completely evident. A similar process of ghettoization, but following other causes, happened in major cities in the States. It was in one of those gay ghettos, Greenwich Village in New York, where an incident, previously insignificant, became the event that lit the spark of articulating the social identity of gays as we know it now. Gay identity. The riots of Stonewall were the beginning of the gay liberation due to two crucial factors. The first one, antinatalism. A more tolerant climate toward non-procreative attitudes was unleashed by women's liberation and the sexual liberation. The second one was the critical mass represented by the aggregation of homosexuals concentrated in specific neighborhoods, where alternative lifestyles were already being explored. In words of Harris, the timing of the Stonewall riots, therefore, was governed by a convergence of conditions favorable to adopting an exclusionist homosexual lifestyle. Activists at the time had specific goals once the window of opportunity was open. The main one being accepted by American society. Gay was the signifier to take distance from homosexual and its reduction to the medical discourse. We could say that gay men emerged when homosexuals decided to authorize themselves as such. Here we can find the symbolic logic of identity in place. The identification to an isolated signifier, gay, which operates as a unary trait, that is, not linked to other signifiers, but to an idealized trace of the other, an insignia from the other, which supports the ego ideal. And in doing so, this insignia, through the ego ideal, normalizes desire. In all the steps taken by the activists working toward constructing this new way of being, we can see that the insignia is virility. They implemented a series of actions, for instance, dressing properly to demonstrate, for instance, men should wear suits and women should wear skirts. They also challenged the medical establishment in the idea of homosexuality being a disease or an illness. In all of those actions, we can read an answer to the enigma of the desire of the other. Que voy? The other wants us to be men. This is one of the paradoxes of the gay liberation. After Stonewall, the variety of the subjective experiences of homosexuals were reduced to a single desirable model. The gay movement initially worked hard to break any association between homosexuality and effeminacy, linking it with masculinity instead. As David Halperin summarizes, in short, post-Stonewall gay male life was defined by the emergence of a new masculine, non-role specific practice of gender and sex, which gave rise to a new style of a new form of life, embodied by the gay clone or the butch gay men. Those developments betokened the proud triumph of an undifferentiated gay sexuality over an earlier discredited effeminate gay culture, from which the new sex-centered model of gay male identity offer a long overdue and welcome refuge. And with this, we can see the articulation of the other two logics of identity. The signifier gay brought, as any of the popular Thomas Phelan drawings can attest, you can see it here in the left, the image of a young Marlon Brando in a perfecto leather jacket, here in the right. This is his character in the film The Wild One from 1954. So this image worked as the mirror where gay men would find themselves. That's me, / that's what I want to be. So ego, ideal, ego. That image behind the mirror, resulting in a quest to embody hypermasculinity. So this image of the gay macho came to operate as an ideal ego, resulting in a quest to embody hypermasculinity. Some decades will be required for the introduction of another signifier, queer, which will allow gay men to lose the restraint of such a constrictive image. Now, in Seminar 5, and we are talking here of the late 50s, Lacan stated that psychoanalysts do not cure homosexuals, and I quote, despite the fact that they are absolutely curable. Put it in the context of Lacan's teaching as a whole, I think we should read that previous quote as the confirmation that being gay involves ultimately a choice of jouissance. Some paragraphs later, Lacan adds something that seems to confirm this idea. Homosexuals, in ordered nuances, grant a prevailing value to the blessed object, to the point of making it an absolute requirement for the sexual partner. The blessed object here is the phallus, understood as the genital organ, as well as any of its symbolic substitutes. Is a must-be in the unfolding of gay sexuality. To admire it, and most of all gay art can be reduced to this: to penetrate, to be penetrated by, to suck it, to watch it when it getting sucked in oneself or in another. It soon reaches the level of a cult. The penis is an idiotic S1, detached from any S2, from which the only possibility is masturbation, or masturbatory version of the social bond. The penis is a gay man's partner. This marker, this fixation with the organ, introduces a distinction rarely explicit when talking about homosexuality, the most common term used in psychoanalytic literature. There are many reasons for a man to have sex with another man. As such, the behavior doesn't define anything at all. It may have some effects in some cases, but it can pass without even being problematized. This is precisely one of the controversial findings in the Kinsey report from the 50s, late 40s, that homosexual sex in men is more frequent than we think, that the distinction between homosexuality and heterosexuality is not as clear as usually thought. Some straight men in analysis disclose it at some point, and in my experience, they don't go further in the exploration. They would say something, it was once or twice, just happened, like a short circuit. In some men, the behavior is more consistent, and again, not necessarily subjectivized as part of the identity. The extent of this group of men having sex with other men without identifying with it led to the invention of a new category, MSM, men who have sex with men or males who have sex with males, as a way to address the challenges associated with HIV/AIDS prevention, as any public health campaign targeting the gay community would not be registered by those who do not identify as gay, despite the fact that they have and enjoy sex with other men, and with that are at risk of being infected with HIV. Also, we know that if a bunch of men get secluded, as in the army, seminaries, or prisons, some of them are going to engage in sex with other men, and not all of them are going to think of themselves as gay or homosexual, though. What I'm trying to transmit here is that there is something of the enjoyment of the organ inherent to the masculine side of sexuation, to the phallic jouissance. As Lacan stated in Lettre D, let us call heterosexual by definition he who loves women, whatever his own sex is. This will be clearer, said Lacan there. It's in this line that Gadea, an Spaniard psychoanalyst, states that male homosexuality, let's circumscribe it here to gay men, is a defense against feminine jouissance. This reduction to a very specific manifestation of masculine jouissance, the focus on the organ, the reduction of happiness to the number of orgasm or the number of partners who get reduced to a prop for a masturbatory act, bring to the surface another of the paradoxes of the gay liberation. In words of Bourdieu, one of the most tragic antinomies of symbolic domination, how people can revolt against a socially imposed categorization except by organizing themselves as a category, constructing according to that categorization, and so implementing the classifications and restrictions that it seeks to resist, rather than, for example, fighting for a new sexual order in which the distinction between the different sexual statuses would be different. As we are going to see, the militant response did not subvert any previous structure. It just followed the same constitutive logic by which the group was segregated, hence the tendency to ghettoization. In words of Harris, the ban on homosexual acts was so complete and the odium attached to it so strong that even a single homosexual performance was sufficient to brand a person for life as a pervert or degenerate. Instead of making way for homosexuality as a supplementary or secondary form of sexual pressure, the American Victorians insisted that only the most depraved persons could so much as contemplate homosexual intercourse. From this, there developed the peculiar notion that homosexuality is not a type of activity, but a state of being, that people are either in a heterosexual state or being on a homosexual state of being. And that if they are in a homosexual state of being, they are a depraved type of person whom other people ought to shun. Activists started from there, changing the sign of the stigma to make it an emblem. That's how the displacement from shame to pride happened, by inverting the sign of the outcomes of segregation. In other words, they identified with historic contingencies associated with exclusion. They made necessary those historic contingencies to constitute a new identity. Let's see how this happened. From the unfolding of history, three main signifiers emerge associated with male homosexual activities. From the religious discourse, homosexuality is a sin. From the judicial discourse, homosexuality is a crime. And from the medical discourse, homosexuality is an illness. The resulting construction from each discourse may vary in content, but all three follow the same logic with the same consequence. Homosexual acts shouldn't exist. Thus, each discourse provides a rationalization for the prohibition and specific interventions intended to erase any homosexual manifestation. The result of these discourses is a society where the big other of culture is constantly surveilling, pushing homosexual acts toward those places where the gaze of the other is not as active or constant. A forest, an isolated public washroom, a park in the night. Men attracted to other men never could develop an equivalent to heterosexual courtship in those contexts. The limitation in social space and in time for any potential encounter force participants to narrow in the interaction to its most basic forms, no more and no less than the rapid pursuit of an orgasm. On this regard, the exposure to such conditions forced men to develop a sophisticated clandestine knowledge, according to Llamas and Vidarte. Through a refined and subtle observation of other men's body language, it is a knowledge on cruising, on how to identify and engage with another man in a furtive and anonymous casual sex act. This knowledge is never transmitted by those regular channels through which information passes from one generation to another, but it can be shared by unorthodox ways, currently the internet or brochures from gay community agencies, and can be applied to multiple contexts. The constraint also fomented the creation of clandestine or undercover places, typically bars and bathhouses. This was the way in which an underground network of places was developed, one subculture where secrecy became the resistance strategy for dealing with the dangers associated with social visibility. After the Stonewall riots, gay bars, bathhouses, and cruising became recognized and owned landmarks of the gay community. The implicit project became explicitly assumed, making this specific form of phallic jouissance the substance of the gay identity. Eventually, this project was challenged due to the eruption of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. The urgency of that drill introduced another massive reorganization of the field. For instance, lesbians became caregivers of dying gay men. The shift eventually produced another signifier, queer, which deepened the decline of the father and the pluralization of its names. At this point, half of a century after the emergence of the gay identity, and almost 40 years after the eruption of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, the original project has resumed. Biomedical advances transformed the infection into a chronic condition, and now antiretrovirals, the medication to manage the infection and contain the development of AIDS, is also used as a preventive strategy against it. It is known as PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, and consists of taking the medication to avoid getting infected. Many seronegative gay men take them. The point here, even with a broader spectrum of signifiers to identify with, queer, non-binary, etc., the science at the core remains the same for a specific group. The command to enjoy through sex with multiple partners continues to be essential, and now AIDS service organizations, ASOs, have expanded their mandates to focus more on sexual health rather than HIV prevention. I think gay men were one of the first groups where we can identify this collectivization of a very specific form of enjoyment, an operation which is one of the mark of our times, that is, the collectivization of jouissance. Hashtag love is love. Before wrapping up, I would like to mention one of the current issues in the LGBTQ+ community. Since June 2016, a new hashtag began to be used in social media. Love is love. The explicit intention of its use is to visualize that it doesn't matter what your sexual identity is, all forms of love are valid. Of course, we cannot but agree with it. And there's a whole section on homophobia that I cannot present today because it's kind of tangential. And there I discuss what will be happening to those affected by the way others deal with their lives. However, so going back to the hashtag, in the case of gay men, the hashtag love is love points to a whole. Let's take the following verse. A rose is a rose is a rose. The sentence is part of the poem Sacred Emily by Gertrude Stein. We could spend hours talking about this verse, but in essence, it works because a rose has a direct material and concrete reference. The verse functions as an ostensible definition, that is, as a way to define by direct demonstration. A rose is a rose is a rose cues us to have the experience of one specific particular rose. It is a challenge to conceptualization and the idea of universals. When we change rose for love, what do we get? If you follow the discussion about how the content of gay culture was forged, you can notice that love is a foreclosed signifier, a signifier not articulated into the symbolic chain. Love is love says nothing. It is a signifier to close one of the crucial enigmas for gay men. What is love? From this idea, I think we have a lot to discuss about the role of psychoanalysis in the context of gay men. On the hype of pride celebration, gay men join a collective delusion of happiness as uninterrupted orgasmic joy. Some of them set themselves to continue the chase of this peak experience as the main goal in life. Within this group, some push even harder, relying on some substances, currently Viagra or similars and crystal meth, to make it happen. When I moved to Canada and came across a solidly established gay community and well-defended gay men, I thought of this envelope called gay identity as a thick first layer of the onion, almost impossible to peel. 14 years later, I see it as a bubble that works for many, one of the many fictions to have a livable life, but fragile, almost ready to easily burst under the weight of everything that the subject hasn't said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Carlos, wonderful paper. Yeah, I agree with all the, yeah, so, well, we can open the floor to questions. I have some, but somebody wants to, let me see. I took some notes. Yeah. Well, while other people, get courage to participate or make questions, Carlos, the quote that in the first page about Miller, no?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand, no? It's what remains invariable in
In homosexuality. Mm-hmm.
and what changes in the social order when received it from a completely different way, when a new norm gives an unprecedented and massive legitimacy to the homosexual bond. So what my question would be, like, what would be that change in the social order? Like when as you said, an example of the same-sex marriage, no? So it's like the impact in the order, no? The social order. So what
Well,
remains invariable? Yeah. What are you referring, or what Miller is referring? I didn't.
well,
Remains invariable.
it has two components. Oh, it's like a two-side coin. On one side is what remains invariable in homosexuality. And if you follow what I try to transmit today, what remains is the phallic jouissance, this collectivization of jouissance, this reduction to a very specific, almost masturbatory. There's an Argentinian analyst that she unfolds different forms of jouissance from the extreme of the table of sexuation to the other extreme, from the phallic to the feminine, and the extreme of the phallic jouissance is the idiotic jouissance, the masturbatory, and she places nearby homosexuals in this way that I described today, that almost and by the way, so this is the structural envelope, right? But as soon as you introduce desire, all this begins to crack. I'm not saying that all gay men are like this, but the more desubjectivized you are, the more you think about yourself, chances are that the more and more you're gonna look like one of the pictures in a gay magazine. So saying so, the homosexual enjoyment of the organ is close to this masturbatory. So the person, as I described, almost gets reduced to a prop in a more direct way, that because at the end we all do that, but it's in a way it's very, it's so crass in the case of gay men. And there's plenty of video showing that, like how it would be if gay men behave as if they behave in Grindr, in the social app to hook up. So that's what I'm talking about. So that's one thing. So there's something historical and ahistorical something that changes the semblance, the image that to think about oneself, and there's something that remains, which is the drive, that phallic response. That's what I think. On the other hand, is what changes in this society. He says what changes in the social order when receive it from a completely different way. And I think he's pointed out to the fact that the other is different now. So this other that doesn't exist. So the decline of the father, the permissiveness. So the other is kinder to homosexuals. So now the focus is on transgender people, but that's what I said, that I remember when homosexuality used to be controversial, because now it's not. So what changes in that social order when receives, when embrace this new form of homosexuality? And of course, this is in the context of the 90s were about the discussion of same-sex marriage. So it was in that transition that for us it looks like dated.
Yeah, Barry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was terrific, and it resonated for me in a number of ways, both personally and also clinically. So just an observation and then kind of a question. I was thinking about, Foucault's epistemic shifts, just some sort of a more academic observation or question. And I recall the notion of, the confluence of some of these forces at play that you sketched out post-war could not have been a priori predicted necessarily in advance, although some may be logically from, neoliberalism and the effects of consumerism and late capitalism, or the emergence of late capitalism. But they get articulated together in ways that could not be predicted in advance. Would that be, first of all, a fair characterization of sort of how you structurally put together that historical set of conditions of possibility?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Barry. Yes, this is not, I try to distance from sociological analysis, and it's more like how we reach what we reach. It's like by après coup, by retroaction, to how we ended here. Because if we place ourselves, even if we place ourselves at the moment of the Stonewall riots, we cannot imagine, let's say that we are there, let's throw in a Molotov, whatever. We are not conscious of the impact that is going to have. So there's one part of what I'm going to develop for the document, the whole document, is the idea of an event. What makes an event an event? That the concept in psychoanalysis will be an act. So it was an act, mm-hmm. but they weren't aware that it was. It happens après coup.
Right. I mean, in another somewhat, I'm thinking of cultural studies and the late Stuart Hall, who had a notion of articulation that was influenced by Foucault in part, where things come together in ways that get articulated together, and a little bit of discourse theory, but get articulated together in ways that you cannot predict, fully understand, the same notion in the moment. My second question is, and I'm thinking about this and really, I'm thinking about a particular, a client of mine actually, and the way in which the aging queer or gay body, if you will, cracks, and in the subjective experience and the subjectivization of what he himself has called to me, the tyranny almost of this the collectivization, as you would say, of jouissance, and the sort of the concerns that he has, for example, around his potency and what kind of a life he will have as he ages, because so much of his own drive investment, his libidinal investment has been in all those things that you described in terms of what's involved in this particular, what did you call it, the idiocy of this of S1.
Yeah, two cases come to my mind. One, I would say it was a point of inflection for me, working in a community agency where I was kind of a counselor, but I'm not in the position to open up processes or just to provide some containment. And it was this person in their 60s, 60 something, with a massive, massive sadness. And when we began exploring, well, his life happened just reduced to the bathhouses and bars and work. So he's 9 to 5, and his social life was through bars and bathhouses, like living the village life. And I think this the real of aging, it was just devastating, and he didn't have much to deal with it. So I think that it would be a matter. That's why I ended this way. Like it's like this bubble. At the beginning I thought because it was this thick imaginary layer, but in reality, because there's a lot in the real, it pours, and it comes in these intense symptoms of loneliness. Is one of the signifiers to group most of the issues associated with the gay life. And in a more positive note, I've been working with a man for quite some years. And at some point he said, he asked me if I knew those Roman statues with, so Priapus. He wanted to be Priapus. That was, and he came to analysis the second time because it wasn't working. The penis wasn't responding. And he moved so many things. And in one of the latest sessions, he said something that he never have mentioned, that it was, oh, so I came to therapy because this thing that happened moved me in so many ways to reflect and think about myself. So he had a cardiac incident. He thought he was having a heart attack. And then after all the results, it was like a valve that wasn't working well. And he says, maybe my issue with my penis, I don't know. I don't know if it's the brain or my heart. And I give back that to him. So, issue of your heart, or your brain or your heart. And what came up was this, how therapy had helped him to open up to the dimension of love. That how began to feel all that cruising empty, meaningless, and not enough to have a good life. And again, we go case by case. And when I mentioned the normalization of desire, is because, well, being a gay man by the book is a way to be and to have a livable life if that works for you. But in some cases, through the cracks, the breaks of the conscious, as in his case, his body was saying, and it's interesting, he's thinking that his body is asking you for a break and to look for a partner with which to have a deeper connection rather than just orgasms. So in summary, I think that one key direction of the cure, if we can say, is toward the opening of love and the connection with feminine jouissance. Oh, and this is key in this case because he's already partnered, but this partner is just a man that doesn't talk much, that doesn't share. They don't share interest. It's just the sexual connection. So he's interpreting his lack of erections as the sign of not being interested in this man anymore. I hope that this.
No, that's very helpful, and it's similar to the direction of the treatment. Where it's good to hear this, because it's kind of where we're hoping it's going, because there's so much anxiety and a kind of desperation and sadness and a requirement for mourning of a certain thing.
Yeah.
And to speak a little Kleinian, there's a bit of mourning. There's mourning that has to take place, and not the destruction of the self, because he has a fantasy that, well, maybe before I hit 50, I'll just kill myself.
Which is a common theme in the gay community, in teenagers when they are all conflicted, and in older people that cannot tolerate aging. And by the way, so what I'm saying is not different from the general structure of the end of analysis. If you remember, I think in some of the presenters we have had here in Initiative Toronto, they talk of the end of analysis as the opening up to these other jouissance, that beyond jouissance. So for a man, just for being a man, this is crucial to open up to that dimension. So it's pretty much the same, just kind of applied to the case of gay men.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much.
And also, in many of those testimonies, also they talk about, some of them, they experience mourning, because, it's a loss, no?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this has to do with, because, when you talk, I thought it was really good about the three logic, no? But before that, when Carlos, said about the mirroring, no? And the ego ideal, no? The merge of the ideal ego, the ideal ego. Yeah, because I thought this was incredible, no? That at this point of the mirror images, no? The subject organizes the perceptive field, no? Distinguishing the body as a unit differentiated from the rest of the environment, no? You are this, no? Thou art that. That is the first answer to the who am I, no? The question, the other person, no? Who I am. So I thought it was amazing when that is impossible, no? That there's always a gap, the unattainable goal, no? That is the aspiration to be like one behind the mirror, no? So I thought this it's like it's impossible to respond, no? To who am I or what the other, because this is before we go to the symbolic, no? That is what the other wants from me. But maybe many of us, or some people, stays in this state, don't go to the other, no? Or the imaginary is like the strongest part, no? The image, and maybe that's why we need to look good.
Yes, I think that, so one of the, let's say, benefits of the later Lacan, the implications is that we can think of the three realms as detached, as separated, and they can articulate. And for instance, in this person that I just mentioned, the imaginary is well developed. So he has these incredible dreams where the task is to connect to the symbolic and identify what is the piece of the real in it. But yes, so in each case, you can think in terms of constructing the case that one of the realms may be more developed than the others, or more connected or linked. And usually, if it's a, let's say, well-functioning person, chances are that is the imaginary that is the more developed. Well, maybe that's an overgeneralization, but.
Marina?
Hi, Carlos. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Your presentation was enlightening. I think that the main point here is that gay is not an identity, but a way of jouissance. And it is something that you mentioned. And I've got two questions.
Mhm.
The first is that you refer to what Lacan said about homosexuals, something which is referred on Lacan Web TV when they talk about trans. They say that transgenders are authorized by themselves and by some others. I would like a comment on this, by some others. The first one is this, and the second question is, I like the paragraph you mentioned, the hashtag love is love, and you say that this is something, it is a closed circuit, a short circuit.
It's like a cap, yeah, like capping or
Yeah.
closing.
Could you explain a bit more on this?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. First of all, yes. In psychoanalysis, jouissance is the substance we work with. So in this case, this phallic jouissance is kind of the real where our interest goes toward, how to regulate, how to deal with that. But it's a knot, it's a Borromean knot. So we need the imaginary and the symbolic to deal with the real. It's like taking a sock and putting it to the other side, for the real to emerge, to wake up a little bit to the real. But that can only be possible through the imaginary and the symbolic. So keep in mind that. And as the second part of that question was about the others authorizing the others authorizing. I think I may need to think more about that, but based on the gay identity. So what happened was, what I wrote was, gay men emerge when homosexuals authorize themselves. When they say, I'm going to own this that happened to me. And that connects with the question, Inés' question about Miller's comment. So that change alters the other. And at the beginning, it's like opening the space. And the other eventually makes room for that. Particularly in a capitalist society, the capitalist discourse has the ability to incorporate almost everything and to make it profitable. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but yes, you need always an other. But the other is not monolithic, it's not there. And what happened is that gay men constructed their own other to articulate that. And probably a similar process is happening now with transgender people. So
Do you think that
the big other as such, like maybe against it, but then there are spaces, because the other is a fiction. Well, there are other ways to build others that are not others of the other, but other types of other, because that's the mark of us. Like, and the simplest way to say it is, once I heard someone, not in a nice way, saying, well, if you want to build up an identity, just get together with a bunch of people having a similar trait and open a website. It's kind of simplistic, but just by doing that, you are creating an other for you. So I hope that this gives you some hints.
Authorization, maybe it has to do with recognition. Do you think so?
Yes, it's the same. You can apply here the structure of jokes. You can say a joke, but if there's no other to validate, to sanction that it's funny, you don't have a joke. And the thing is, we laugh at our jokes, if we think about it, because we already have incorporated that other.
Yeah, so we laugh, you know, we are our audience, no? That we laugh to our
Yes.
jokes. Yeah.
So yeah, it's the same structure as what happens with a joke. You need another. And if you see, the construction of identity always involves another. In the imaginary logic is the other of the mirror. In the symbolic logic is the other of the signifier. And even in the third logic is the other of the body. The body is another. Humans cannot survive without another.
Is there another question or comment? I have.
What about love?
Okay. The other of love or?
Or the hashtag love is love.
Ah, okay.
Oh, yeah, that was the other. Okay. So, you know, if you take the hashtag, love is love. And that's what it's saying is as A equals A. But if A is a empty signifier, you're comparing a whole with a whole. In that sense, I'm saying that the hashtag is saying nothing. I mean, if you, of course, each of us may have our own idea of love. And then when we hear love is love, we are going to put that. But what I wanted to emphasize is that in the case of gay men, is an enigma for those anchored in phallic reasons that haven't been haven't opened up to that dimension of otherness. Love means so many things or nothing. Couples therapists outside psychoanalysis, they say that the main challenge for lesbian couples is the enmeshment, the suffocation, and the challenge for gay men is the lack of intimacy. And that's a way to address something that I'm trying to transmit. So it's a dimension that has to be opened.
I don't know if this, what you're talking about when you say a rose is a rose is a rose, used to have the experience of one specific particular rose. It is challenging to conceptualize, and I didn't understand quite which one of the three is the particular rose. A rose.
Oh, that's why it works. So it's like a circle. It's like it's in a way saying nothing, but a rose it reminds you of it cues you to think of a rose. A rose is a rose is a rose. So the signifier change is opening the space for you to think of that specific rose.
Yeah,
but you cannot do that if the signifier is empty. Because love is abstract.
Yeah, it's for closed, no? You say for closed signifier.
Maybe the rose has got the
close,
materiality.
Yeah, it's abstract because it's not. You cannot point out directly to love, as in the poem. Because the poem, what it's doing is a rose is a rose is a rose. Is saying, think of this, and you will think of something. But foreclose means that the gay man hasn't had the opportunity to articulate, to think about it. It's a mystery. It's a void in the network of knowledge.
And when you say the gay woman is suffocation, and in the gay man, the challenge, no, of the gay man is the intimacy. You are referring to the position, to the male position, and the feminine position, or to women, like bodily, and to men. Or
I would take it as sexuated, as the psychic choice of sex. Yeah. Okay. I don't think that couple therapists thinking that way, but we know that sex is a psychic choice rather than that correlated to anatomy.
Okay, so this is in the couples therapy. You are saying that is like experience, or
It's like a saying they have, yeah. Couple therapies with experience with LGBTQ couples. It's like a simplification.
There used to be a joke that went around, I remember years ago. What do lesbians bring? This is just a joke. What do lesbians bring on their second date? A U-Haul and all its baggage. What does a gay man bring on his second date? There is no second date.
oh,
And that joke, it's an old joke, encapsulated the stereotype, if you will, or the type of relationality that I think, if I'm not mistaken, Carlos, you're referring to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Scott?
Hi, Carlos. Thank you. That was great. So I'm going to ask a question or ask you to comment on my little ramble.
Okay.
So I'm thinking about queer, signifier queer. I'm thinking about universalism. And so I guess that's a preliminary question is there a relationship between queer and feminine jouissance and universality? And so I was thinking about there is no sexual rapport as, a fundamental antagonism that determines the field in which we exist. And I was thinking about the transition. So Zizek writes about like his transition from classical Marxist thinking, where proletarian is, one is defined as proletarian as having a certain relationship to the means of production. And he goes on in some recent writing about talking about proletarianization as I can't remember exactly, but a way in which capital, we are all subject to the exploitative force of capitalism, but not in a necessarily particular way. We're not all laborers. We're not all, industrial machinists or whatever. And in fact, current capitalism demands that a lot of folks are purposefully excluded. And so we all sort of experience this progressive proletarianization where we are subject to the antagonism. So that's why I'm sort of connecting, and this is why I say it as a bit of a ramble, I'm sort of connecting this idea of moving from thinking in how we are differently relate to power, but towards how are we universally, even if we have different ways of articulating that, how are we I'll just stop there and sort of make another reference to Stonewall. And I really like the idea you said as an event. And I've not read a lot about you, but this idea of being a subject in fidelity to the event. And, Stonewall happened, and it is our ethical duty to live out the consequences of that act. And I guess what my sort of direction I'm pointing in is away from particular ways of loving towards a universal love. And I'm thinking about feminine jouissance. So not much of a question there, just a lot of things I've been thinking about as you were talking. And I mean, I've not actually got to study the late Lacan a lot. So feminine jouissance is still a big mystery for me. Yeah, so I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Well, what I'm hearing, well, first, I'm curious to know, it's interesting because it's the possibility of a dialogue between different discourses. I'm curious as to why capitalisms demand exclusion from some people. I never heard that before.
So Zizek is putting the focus away from the industrial laborer as this figure of the revolution, and recognizing how capitalism is functioning now needs for a lot of people to be without work. So not what Marx would have called the lumpen proletariat or the reserve army, but we actually don't have enough work, and so he basically moves towards the argument that people in favelas, like the slum dwellers of the world, are the structurally and functionally excluded of the circulation of capital, the circulation of the real of capital, and that
when it's interesting, again, for the dialogue, I think that in general, you're pointing out to different things that need to be thought. And this is an opportunity to keep thinking, particularly the last piece, but beginning before. I think that psychoanalysis, Lacanian psychoanalysis, comes from a different angle. So for instance, power is not a concept in psychoanalysis. So it gets kind of diluted or reframed in the theory in different ways. On top of that, I would say that psychoanalysis may have a harsher approach to the individual, in the sense that is the other and it's your position with the other. So there's no substantialization of the other as someone with an intention, or so in this case, and at some points Zizek says that most people think that there's a bunch of millionaires or people moving the course of the puppet, but the problem is that there's no one is doing that. It's just a bunch of idiots doing something randomly.
The real circulates and consequences abound.
Yes, and I would think, and of course, is to think about more. And maybe Samos is a better person than me. What's his name? The Unconscious of the Capitalism, this book by Tom Samos, I think is his name. But I would say from a more traditional Lacanian perspective, is about identifying the position in front of this other, and from there opening the space for you to invent your own solution.
So let me ask at that point, looking forward, thinking about, I mean, like you said, I'm bringing in my Marxist discourse to think about the cause. And this is, a lot of my thinking is the psychoanalytic cause and the cause and cause in general. But for you, so I'm asking you, I guess, looking forward, are you interested in investing in queer? And is there something universal about queer? And is there something connected to feminine jouissance?
That's the most interesting part, for me at least, of your question. Is universal love related to feminine jouissance? It's something to think about, but we have some hints that it's not. That is inventing your own way to love is because the feminine jouissance is that part of jouissance that is structured by the phallus, but is not regulated by it. So that opens another dimension where, for instance, each woman needs to find, there's no unconscious inscription of what is a woman. So hence the famous saying, woman doesn't exist. So each woman needs to invent their own way to be a woman. And when we are in that dimension, I think that we could say, and of course, to think more about it, we invent our own way to love, what is possible for us in terms of love. I don't think, yeah, I don't see any, well, by definition, that side of the sexuation table is not universalizable, cannot be universalized. So the queer, there are a lot of connections between the queer theory and Lacanian psychoanalysis, and they are emerging more and more. And I would say it has to do with going back to the roots or the fundamentals of queer theory rather than the essentialization of queerness, because that's where the tricky, and it happens with psychoanalysis as well. Lorenzo Chiesa, he focused his work in how to think psychoanalysis without reifying or substantializing jouissance, for instance, or the real. How to keep psychoanalysis as a materialism that is not transcendental. I hope that this goes in the line that you're talking.
It does. Well, I mean, I gave to you some vague interconnections. Yeah, just it's stuff, a lot of stuff to think about.
But it's to keep thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah. Can you repeat that phrase, Carlos, that about the relationship between feminine jouissance and the phallic jouissance, that is like a structure?
Oh, yeah, feminine jouissance is structured by the phallus, but it's not regulated by it.
Regulated, okay, because I would not determine, but regulated is not regulated by it. Okay. Is there another question? Scott, if you can lower your hand. So, okay, 1 second. I had another question.
There's a question in the chat.
Okay.
That I can read if you'd like.
The person left, but yeah, Valentina, she had to leave, but I'm sending her an email, but we can, and then she can listen also to the answer in the recording. That's a good idea. Thank you, Scott. I started writing her an email copying to Carlos, so Carlos can answer to her, but it's better that
please do so. Yeah. And
yeah.
Okay, so the question is, well, she thought about some of her patients.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, but it's good to read all, Carlos, because thank you very much for the invitation. Your paper is very interesting, Carlos. You made me think about some of my patients. I can't stay now and in the meeting, but I would like to talk about those ones who do fall in love. Love equal feminine jouissance, of course. Moreover, love for another person, mother, a woman, for instance, in Freddie Mercury, is a current reference in their lives.
That's a very good question. And it brings two themes that are present even in Freud, or are already present in Freud. One, that the ego is the addition of different identifications. So in a way, I just dissected and work on a specific line, one specific identification, but we are, if you remember Irma's dream, when Freud, all the characters in that dream are facets of his ego. So it's not, and in the discussion of Lacan, it's not that he is, there's no regression, is the dismantling of the ego as that onion that gets peeled in layers. So what that means, well, that means that, oh, and this is the other theme already present in Freud, love is transformative. And someone could fall in love and that just shaken. I'm trying to remember, someone was telling me, and what was emerging is that he fell in love and it shattered his world and has to be reorganized again. So yes, what about those ones who do fall in love and loving another person, like mother, or an idol. Yes, all those are different facets, different layers that have to be considered. And it's interesting because the working analysis is to be aware of that, to do something with it. Like a typical, well, sometimes with men is well, what are you gonna do with your harder side and your softer side? Because for some men, one of those is troublesome. So it's about identifying, unfolding, and noting, creating a narrative where through which we can address the real in each case. So I think that answers the question, I think. It's interesting because yes, you could have with this case I mentioned that one segment of the journey is all about my penis is working, it's not working. This morning I had an erection, I didn't have an erection, I'm going to the urologist. I'm all focused on this obsessive reverberance around being prepuce and it's not working, and just recovering memories of all the impulsiveness, sexual impulsiveness in the past, and suddenly talking about relationship with the mother or a dear friend, or yeah, those are facets that has to be accounted. It's not unidimensional. You're muted, Ines.
No, maybe it has to do with my other question that was when in the letter D, Lacan says that you mentioned, no, you cite him, that there is some that what you are trying to transmit is something of the enjoyment of the organ inherent to the masculine side of sexuation, no? As Lacan says, letter D, let us call heterosexual by definition he who loves women, whatever his own sex.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like he puts the heterosexual more in the formulas, no? In the side,
yes,
how you do
it's
it.
about jouissance.
It's about how you do it. It doesn't make, if you are on the side of if you love the other side, the feminine side, then you are heterosexual, no?
Yes.
Even if you are yourself are a woman. Because
yes.
even if you are in the feminine, no? Maybe even if you are in the feminine side, but if you love the feminine side, then you are heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you are in the other side.
Yeah.
Or
And I
if
think the end of analysis is moving toward that, to that opening to heteros, as he says there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing, yeah. Yeah, the other question was, well, just maybe a specific one when you talk about the development of the AIDS that is used as a preventive strategies, no, that at the same time was used as a preventive or against it. I didn't understand very well. Yeah, when you were saying the half of the century after the emergence of the gay identity and almost 40 years after eruption, the original project was reassumed. Biomedical advances transformed the infection in a chronic condition, and now antiretroviral. The medication.
I sometimes I transpolate something that Zizek says about capitalism to the gay community. So capitalism is about the circulation of the capital. And sometimes it's seen as is the project in the gay community is the circulation of fluids. So in that sense, the epidemics shatter that, and it took some years until the medication was developed to contain the infection, meaning stopping the AIDS cases. And what I'm saying there is that the HIV infection is now a chronic condition. So someone taking antiretrovirals can live a life similar to one that is seronegative. the most recent advance is that now the same medication is used by seronegative people.
Oh.
So it's a preventative. If you have the antiretrovirals in your body, if you get if HIV gets access to your body, won't create antibodies. It won't create the infection.
Oh.
So that is called prophylaxis exposure. So PrEP, and is the most recent incorporation in terms of practices of health for gay men. So if you are in Toronto and you're a gay man and your family doctor is gay aware or LGBTQ aware, it's going to suggest you, based on your history of sexual practices, may suggest to initiate PrEP.
Like a vaccine.
It's
Well,
it in the sense that prevents, but it's not. If you stop taking the medication, if the levels of the component decreases in your blood, you are at risk of getting infected. It's HIV is one of those weird. It's a postmodern infection in the way that it behaves. So that could be a thing for another opportunity, but no, it's not a vaccine.
Well, my other question was that, well, you said that you cannot present today that the whole section of homophobia, no? That, but I don't know if you can say a little bit, because at the end, when you introduce the love is love, all forms of love are valid, no? Then you said, of course, we cannot but agree with it, no? We cannot but agree, so we agree, no? Of course. There is a whole section of homophobia that I cannot present today, where I discussed that would be happening to those affected by the way others deal with their lives. So
what I tried to do was to understand how someone gets triggered, would be the ordinary term, when someone expresses what they do with their life. So ultimately, homophobia is about the one who is suffering it. And what I do is to unpack the term, how it was introduced, what it means, how it's a signifier that worked at the time, what is the real that is trying to address. And then from there, my let's say my contribution is to think homophobia from structures. So because your response is going to be mediated by your relationship with language. So I'm distinguishing what it would be psychotic homophobia. And I think the previous Pope Benedict displays that type, like homosexuality is this awful thing that's going to destroy the universe and society. So you can see that the real of the drive returning disconnected as a in this imaginary buffer that is something cataclysmic. And it's like to differentiate different type of homophobia. So you can have a obsessional homophobia, whether phobic or counterphobic, and you can have hysteric homophobia based on your ambivalence. So it's and perverse homophobia. So it's just unfolding, unpacking that, and giving examples of different expressions.
And Marina, here you are asking something on the chat. Isn't this kind of preparation a kind of consumption of medication?
Yes, regarding PrEP.
Yeah, it's a medication. It's the actual medication to manage HIV. And it's a way to keep having sex without getting infected. So in a way, it's aligned with the capitalist discourse. Yes, it is enable.
That's right. A kind of consumption.
Yes, yeah, it's a way to see it. as you can see, the kind of aside, as you see the search of psychedelics. So when you think a little bit about incorporating ayahuasca and other psychotropics in mental health, ultimately it's a good strategy for the pharma to expand the market and get new products in the shelf. Which tied to the connection is that, well, psychoanalysis is not an adaptive tool. It's not interested in promoting any particular model, but just enabling subjects to invent based on their own real. So from that point that I'm kind of having a critical approach to this idea that substances can help you to feel better, because that ultimately is to adapt you and keep working and keeping the machinery, the automaton going.
Thank you. Well, it's really amazing that the work that you are doing is really good. And we are looking forward for the continuation. This is like a series. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure sharing with you.
Yeah.
Hope it was
Thank you.
useful.
Yeah, oh, very nice. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. So in September, in August, I hope everybody enjoys the summer, nice summer. And then in September, at the end of August, I will send invitation for activity in September, okay? So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Carlos, especially. Great job. Thank you.
Bye.
Great discussion. Thank you so much. Bye.